Hey everyone, and welcome back to the news. A lot has happened, a fair amount of drama actually, but much of that has actually been addressed in a pretty good way, so that's kind of sweet. Plus, well, just a bunch of great moves from Blizzard actually, with character customization, class design, and a bunch more good stuff for Shadowlands, which is pretty sweet, so we've got a lot of nice things to cover today. Oh, first, Patreon. If you want some sweet loot, then this month has you covered. We've got the Druid class pin, so that's a thing you can get, and we're now caught up with the virus delays, so shipping is, all gonna be on time and stuff. Then past that, we've got another special this month. We're kicking off a series of pieces on Afterlife, so we're going Gothic this month, then our native Irish soon, and a few more as well after that. Plus, of course, there's the Great Plains themed art set too. So there's that, plus our daily gaming news service, early access videos, and a bunch of other stuff. So patrons, thank you. You guys have saved our asses and continue to do so. So cheers. The team really appreciates it. And with that, let's just get stuck straight into the news. Alright, so we're going to kick it off today by showing you some of the character creation because, man, it is so much better now, and this is stuff that has all sort of popped in, and it's beginning to come together in the actual alpha that we can play and test. So, yeah, it's really cool. We will do a full overview of, like, every single option once everyone is there. Like, as an example, Night Elves are data mined, but they're not actually in the build right now. But what I want to do is, first, right, let's just hop in and take a look at a Druid. Now, this is an existing Druid, not the character creation menu. So you can go to the barber shop and it actually pulls you into this brand new UI. Now, I think a Worgen Druid is almost the perfect way to test all of these new features because there's just so much that they can do. So for the Worgen players, number one, I mean, it's nice having the new Worgen models that, that have been put in the game. That's pretty sweet. But one of the existing issues for them was, well, yeah, you kind of couldn't, like, customize your human and your Worgen separately. Now, you can do that. So you can just customize the two of them separately. And when you're actually going through all of those options, as we sort of talked about before, they're on these drop-down menus. They have names. That means that it's a lot easier to remember them. And just the systems, not the sliders, like the drop-downs and stuff, it's all quite a bit nicer. So that's pretty cool. But then you're also a Druid. And what does that mean? Well, it means that for all of your different forms, you can actually select what version you want, right? So, you've got your 4 different travel forms, or your water forms, your different travel forms, your flight forms. And yeah, you can just choose them at the barbershop. You don't have to do this via, a glyph or something like that. It's all just kind of there in this nice system. And then when we actually go into other customizations that are there, so we sort of zoom away from the Druids for a second, well, there's even more coming, right? Number 1, bald characters. So yeah, you can now go make your character bald, and maybe, who knows, in a few years once I chop off the bat, that'll represent me. So yeah, there you go. That's pretty cool. I'm sure Asmongold's Twitter has been going absolutely mad over that lately. Oh dear, right, there's that. Night Elves, right? They have leaves in their hair. That's pretty darn cool, right? So it's just like the Warcraft 3, like the War 3, like, key art of the Night Elves. So that's pretty sweet. And then, I mean, it's a pity that Tumblr no longer allows NSFW content because Draenei tail customization is in. I'm sure there is a slice of the internet who is going to be very, very excited about this. But more generally speaking, yeah, it's pretty cool. You can customize your Draenei's tail. I mean, finally, but there's cool, like, wraps and, is wraps the word? Oh, no, I'm saying your vinyl wrap your tail, but there's, like, decorations and stuff and different types of tails. That's all really damn cool, right? And this is something that WoW has just not really done that much, not really done that well either. And of course, there's so many other things, right? Like there's headdresses for the Taurens, and just loads of stuff. I think we're at the stage where it will all be actually in the game pretty darn soon, so do expect a full, like, run through of it from us. But just for now, this is absolutely sweet. One of the things that WoW always suffered from is, I mean, your characters, they're just kind of these weird dudes, right? You couldn't really customize them that much. You couldn't really make them your own. Whereas, now you've just got so much more that you can do with your characters. And what I think is really nice is that Blizzard have invested in UI. They've invested in systems here. And it's clear that they've made it so that they can just add on more stuff in the future. And I think that's something that's really, really darn exciting. Now, you combine that with being able to have, one shoulder transmog and just them freeing up some of the requirements there. And I really do think they're laying the groundwork for stuff that could be really, really good in the future. I mean, come on. We heard Chris, it's either Robertson or Robinson. He's like, one of the art leads? And we heard him at a BlizzCon. This is like 2 or 3 years ago. But we heard him talking about why in the past they hadn't done tinted armor in the game because basically, right, in TBC, they would do their armor grayscale baseline and then they would basically mess around with the color, hue, value, saturation and stuff after the fact. And that's why the PBC armor was so garish in general. So he basically said if we were going to do tinted armor, what they would need to do is actually make sets that are very much designed to be tinted and then do, you know, artist-made tint options, but then just give you a massive selection. So he mentioned that a few years ago, and, you know, I'm just thinking, if we're seeing all of these new customization options appearing in the game, you've got him talking about that, I just do have to wonder if they have this plan to double down a bit more on actually making characters reflect their players. And you know what, if that's the case, I think that's pretty darn cool. So, Blizzard, GG, you're doing great work, and it's doubly cool because you could have just added a bunch of other allied races and you could have included them in the pre-order, right? Or, you know, something like that that would have got you more money directly, but you choose not to do that, right? You chose to actually work in what mattered for existing players. I think that's great. I respect that. So that's pretty cool. But that said, it's time to move on to a little bit of a drama. Okay, so this is one that, you know, kind of ticked me off a little bit personally. I think we've got to a better state with it now. So back in the day, I used to be a massive gold making player, right? I loved meta gems, right? I was always, you know, when I was in school, I had the auction house app in my phone. I was messing around with that. I was using TSM, doing the ore shuffles. It was great stuff. And a part of what I was doing there also involved glyphs. And if you know the glyph market, especially back then, you were doing a lot of posting, a lot of canceling, a lot of relisting, because that's just how glyphs were. Well, fast forward to today, and yeah, there's still a lot of things that put a lot of, well, I guess just tax the auction house quite a bit in terms of performance. So what Blizzard have done is they've decided to basically add a restriction on the amount of auction house API calls that a player can do per minute. Now, you're maybe thinking, I don't make an API call. Well, basically what that means is, you know, you're posting, you're scanning, you're canceling. They just want to throttle how much of that you can do per minute. Now, Blizzard's goal here was to minimize the impact of extreme auction house users on overall performance and to also limit their capability, because Blizzard felt that add-ons gave a massive advantage. And in fairness, man, if you're trying to do a bunch of professions and you're not using Trade Skill Master, you're just doing it less efficiently, right? And that's basically an interesting situation. TSM just unlocks so much power, the ability to do all of those mass functions. It is great. It honestly, for me, removes like the UI annoyance from like gold making in the game. It removes the UI annoyance and lets me focus on, you know, markets, right? Focus on my professions, actually get into the meat of what I'd want to do as a crafter. Versus the default UI. But that said, there was a power imbalance there where somebody not using an add-on like that was, yeah, let's be real, massively weak in comparison to those who were. So Blizzard basically felt that there was a performance problem and there was a balance problem. They implemented a very heavy-handed solution where they had this throttle on API limits, and it was really, really stringent at the start and applied to basically all sorts of things you could do in the auction house. Now, this was especially the case for professions like the scribes, where, you know, you're naturally posting a hell of a lot of stuff. And, you know, I mean, let's be real, right? Doing inscription and doing stuff for every class, getting full coverage of your profession and not using an add-on is not a fun experience, right? So initially, this was pretty badly done from Blizzard. It came absolutely out of the blue. They did not consult anybody on it. Now, I can see how they maybe would want to do it now so that it's in place for when Shadowlands drops, but basically, that's what went down. Now, the community proposed a number of fixes. One of them was for Blizzard to only throttle cancel scans. Now, this is because repeated cancel and relists are basically what led to much of the quantity of API calls that were going on from the most extreme AH users. Now, another thing people suggested was having like items be returned to your mailbox in a throttled manner, so those mass like relist things couldn't be done. Well, what ended up happening is Blizzard listened to the goblins, the gold makers, and they significantly reduced all limitations, right, in terms of the player budget and the API calls, bar cancel scans. So basically, right now, continued cancel and relisting is a bit penalized. The rest of it is a bit more okay. I think we just need to be realistic. The default profession UI and profession like auction house experience, you know, it's not that good, right? The current, like the revamp that they did is really good for like your average user just selling their mats, right? Selling some herbs or something like that. But for the people who really want to hardcore use the auction house, it's not that great. So that's kind of what's rough here. The current AH and professions are not set up for industry. It's not like EVE Online and the industry stuff there. And that's kind of tricky because industry is what actually sets up most of the economy. And what that ends up doing in the game is it drives down prices and increases efficiency. So if you basically force people to use worse tools, then you're going to have a less efficient market, and that at the end of the day is going to hit the core consumers of materials, right? So I think that the less efficient all these markets are, then yeah, the more expensive your raid mats and stuff are going to be. Not that I think that's Blizzard's intent here, but basically it's a messy situation. I would love to know though, if you're a big gold maker, how do you think it's actually shook out now? So let me know, and let's move on. And then following on from what we'd mentioned in the last news episode, well, MALDRAXXUS is actually in the game now, and that actually means that all the core zones, all the Shadowlands are there. They're all testable. We can play all of them. The other side is also there, that dungeon. So a lot of content's there. And to be honest with you, I would not be surprised if we flip over to beta pretty soon. Now, in terms of lore stuff, I'm not going to go super into it. Like, we already knew that Draka would be there. So Draka's there. She's a Baroness. She's our ally. Sort of quests with us through the zone. Now, there is one that's slightly more spoilery if you've seen the models in the game. I'm not going to give you super specific plot elements, but yeah, so 3, 2, 1, mild spoilers. Let's go. Lady Vash is there, Baroness Vash. Now, it's actually quite fun there is, well, there's one nice thing. If you defeated her in Serpent Shrine Cavern, then she has specific dialogue referencing that, which admittedly is pretty awkward if you're Valpera, because the timeline doesn't make sense. But still, I like the idea there, so GG Blizz. Now, what's kind of fun there is Vash is our ally, okay? Now, here's the deal. Vash was never really Illidan's ally, right? She was helping Illidan, yeah, but she canonically was sided with Ashara for that whole time. So then I've got to wonder, is Vash still working for Ashara, right? Is that the situation? I mean, Ashara seems to know a crazy amount of stuff cosmically. Remember what? She just left to deal with the real problem during Ny'alotha. So, you know, if she's done that, and then Vash, like one of her most trusted people, is in the Shadowlands doing stuff, seemingly helping us, I mean, yeah, there could be some real interesting lore there and some cool developments. But anyway, there you go. That's the core of it. MALDRAXXUS is in. There's a bunch more story there. And all of the base zones of the Shadowlands are in. So what's next? I mean, endgame, right? Proper testing, legendaries, conduits, soulbinds, covenants, all of that stuff. Maybe our covenant campaigns. We're getting there. I mean, this game's still obviously going to be like a Q4 launch, but it's nice to see things shaping up. And as you'll see in the class section of this video, it's also nice to see that Blizzard are pretty much back on the saddle when it comes to responding to feedback. All right, so there's been a situation brewing on Classic for a long-ass time, and, well, Blizzard have talked about it. So they've banned a total of 74k accounts, mostly for automation. And they did acknowledge that sometimes innocent people could be caught by this, and that they understand that it's really frustrating when that happens. You know, when an innocent person gets caught, or maybe when Blizzard are worried about catching innocent people and, you know, don't make bans, right? And then people see the same botted account, or maybe see somebody, you know, botting and then just making a fresh account and botting again. And basically, Blizzard said that they've issued these bans, that they're working on more ways to actually do this stuff and to solve this problem. I would say, though, that fundamentally, it is just a really challenging thing. As an example, multi-boxing is a massive thing on Classic, and it impacts Classic in a way that's very different to Live because, you know, in Classic, those resources are a lot more limited, right? And that means that competition is pretty fierce for resources and that multi-boxers can really upset the balance of power there. Now, in order to basically cap off a bunch of things, Blizzard have also added a 30-day instance per day cap, and that is basically per day per realm, and that's basically clamped down on what's actually possible there. Now, there's a lot of people worried that that could hit more people than intended, but I think, personally, it shows that you've got this fundamental problem here, right, where stopping botting in terms of bans and creating tools to automatically shut down botters, that is far, far, far harder than just implementing stuff in-game that stifles the potential efficiency of botters. I think that's way easier to do, but of course it's got that higher chance of actually impacting regular gameplay. So overall, it's a somewhat tricky situation. If you're worried about like PvP instances counting towards that cap, don't worry, they don't. But yeah, there you go. That's the situation in Classic. It seems like just across a lot of the world, there's issues there. I mean, there's, you know, talk as an example, you know, like WoW token being available in Classic in China, that actually cut down, I believe it's like 70% is the numbers I was hearing, the profitability of actually doing botting. So it's just interesting. It's things like that to cut down on the incentives for all that stuff, rather than actually being able to fundamentally deal with it. And, you know, if you've been watching our other channel, yeah, we've got another channel, the Gaming News one, well, you know, you've got situations like Denuvo anti-cheat, you've got Vanguard, which is Valorant's built-in one, but that's basically like a rootkit right? That's running on your PC all the time. You can, you can't shut that down and then launch Valorant as an example. And it may be that extremely draconian options like that are the only way to properly stifle things like botting and stuff. But then you got this situation where your average Joe who's not doing botting, do they really want some root access, super deep security system like deeper than Warden that we already have on their computer? And I think most people kind of wouldn't be comfortable with that. So it's an interesting situation. And to be honest with you, I do empathize with Blizzard because it's a bloody tough nut to crack. And I think that much is obvious because every company has been dealing with this problem for a very long time. I mean, it's funny, way back in the day in RuneScape, one of the ways they solved this problem, not solved, but tried to solve this problem, was the random events, right? You know the way you'd be doing something in RuneScape and then just a random NPC would appear beside you and give you a quiz or, something like that. If you did the quiz, you could get a little reward or maybe, I don't know, a party hat or something. One of the reasons that was there, and I kind of know this because I know a guy who was an ex-CM in that game. One of the reasons that was there was actually to catch out botters, because if you just ignore those NPCs, they basically teleport you to jail. So that's how RuneScape dealt with the problem. No idea how Classic can deal with it, but obviously a tough nut to crack. Next up, we got something the Blizz got a bit ridiculed for, and I think it's just because, it really did just show how silly and arbitrary one of the things in the game is. So Blizzard ended up unveiling the full rotation of corruption gear from Mother. They just posted the whole thing saying that, yep, this changes twice a week with the assault reset, and here's all the different, configurations that can be, and the order. And this basically means that's it, right? It's not an RNG, what's going to be in the box this week? What's Mother going to sell this rotation? No, we actually just flat out know. So that's a bit weird, right? I think it prompted ridicule because it just made the whole rotation feel super pointless, right? And I think that's a little bit rough. Because people are just going to be like, well, if I know everything's here and I know when it's going to come up, why can I just not buy stuff whenever I want, right? I mean, what if you're in a situation where your gains of resources just happen to not match up with Mother's schedule? Maybe you miss out on the thing you want by a week. That just feels like you're being arbitrarily dicked around by the game. So what I'd say here is, Blizz, come on, man, just let people do what they want, right? Like, people want to get those materials so they can get some corruption, so they can play with the corruption system and make their characters more strong. You don't need to go putting barriers in there. And I think that, the unveiling of this kind of just shows how arbitrary and silly the whole thing is. So honestly, Blizz, come on, just remove it, right? Just let Mother sell it all. Yeah, there might be 5 or 6 or 7 tabs on Mother's, vendor menu, or maybe even 12, but that's okay. Players can live with that. Now, the other thing that got people a little bit ticked off is in that same post, Blizzard also mentioned that there was no change planned for the Malefic Core cloak upgrades after rank 15 of Astracamus. So that means that, right now players will just feel pretty stuck behind, right, for their Malefic Core acquisition. And that's just a fundamental thing that's going to be there. So there's not much you can do about it unless Blizzard, of course, end up having a change of heart, which they tend to do, right? But the thing is, they have their change of heart after players have got a bit frustrated and then wandered away from the game to go and do something else, right? It's like with 8.3. If 8.3 had have launched and Mother just had have had, her new currency system and you could just purchase corruptions, man, I would have played so much more, right? Because I would have been thinking, oh, okay, well, it's a bit sad that I still have, the RNG gear and stuff, but whatever. I could go get some resources, get some corruptions, put them on my gear, have a bunch of fun. Yeah, but I kind of couldn't do that. But then by the time the Blizzard actually put that in, well, it was after I cared, right? It was after it mattered, so it didn't really have the impact that it could have. I would say, Blizz, you got to think about these things, and ideally do them a little bit earlier, right? And maybe try to not make those mistakes in the first place. Anyway, speaking of mistakes, let's talk about something that's not a mistake. A good change on the alpha. Alright, so this is one for the warriors who have seen some changes. Basically, the Arms of Mastery has been reworked to increase damage taken by targets who have deep wounds, rather than the old and current version of increasing the damage from deep wounds. And this is really cool, because this means that the Mastery is less focused on the bleed doing damage, and that actually means that it will scale better with all of your abilities. So that, I think, is a pretty darn cool change. And then they've done another change to, I guess, spice up your execution sort of angle, right? Execution no longer gives those deep wounds, and that actually means that Mortal Strike is needed to maintain deep wounds uptime. Now, I believe deep wounds lasts for 12 seconds, so the idea there is every 12 seconds you got a Mortal Strike to keep up deep wounds, because deep wounds will amplify the damage of your execute. So basically, it's putting a little bit more flavor into that execution range. And then also, Cleave has been changed from, I guess, the old version that we kind of thought was pretty fun. Well, it now has a cooldown and replaces sweeping strikes, and actually it can use your overpower stack to do more damage, so that's very different. I mean, man, it really is very different indeed, right? Like, it's weird. Sweeping strikes, you know, it's cool in concept, like in the way the Blade Flurry on a, you know, on a, I almost said combat, an outlaw rogue is kind of cool, right? The idea you hit this button and now your main attacks are cleaving. That's really sweet. I just wish they would put some sort of attack on sweeping strikes or take it off the GCD. Blizz, I would say, you know, totally roll with this new design for cleave. I think that's really cool. But at the same time, maybe go to sweeping strikes, either take it off the GCD or make sweeping strikes actually be an attack that you will want to do that then gives you a buff for however many seconds. So I think that's probably what they should do there. And then another thing they've done is they've made it so the collateral damage can be played around to basically do more damage in mass AoE. So yeah, it's the situation where if you can use collateral damage well, you can kind of build it up really big and then sort of dump it when you want to, which is pretty sweet. And then finally, there was something a bit sad, and that's that Ravager now replaces Bladestorm. Now, back in our coverage of that class, we were kind of praising how it was cool that Ravager did not replace Bladestorm anymore, because what it meant is you could kind of go for giga AoE in, you know, in one pull, or say in a Mythic Plus situation, you know, you could Bladestorm this pack, Ravager this pack, wait for this one, Bladestorm Ravager, you could spread it out. It just kind of felt like you had more options and resources to play with. So I will admit, I am kind of sad that that's no longer a thing. But anyway, with that covered, I just wanted to mention Fury as well, because Single-Minded Fury is back. You can dual wield one-handers again, and that just gives you more options, basically. So they did that, then they did a big talent pass that, I mean, it seems interesting. We will just have to go and take a deeper look, though, before we can properly talk to you about that. And then collateral damage has also got the same change that it has over in arms. And then finally, there is one thing that's, like, really nice, I think, especially for the opener, and that's that Recklessness now generates 40 rage on you. So you can hit it, and you can start doing stuff, and I think that makes it feel a lot better when you're combining it with charge and you're doing an opener. So I think that, again, is really, really good stuff. And what's nice is you then, you know, you pair that up with the stuff we were talking about in our last edition of the WoW News, which was, I mean, especially the shamans finding themselves in a far better position. Now, it's still not perfect, and we're probably going to do some sort of highlight video, at least on enhancement, but it was like nice to see that level of iteration. And here, again, we've seen more class changes. Now, one of the worries was that, man, was it for 4 weeks, 5 weeks? But there was a period of time, right, where, you know, there was a bunch of issues people had with classes. And to be very clear, there still are issues that people have with classes. I mean, Warlocks, they still are, I think, rightly salty about a few things. And, you know, places where their characters don't really feel like they fit that much, like Mythic Plus is a, you know, bit of a tricky example as well. So they're not going to be that happy. Guardian Druids, who, I mean, by this stage must all just be bored and asleep. I mean, I'm not being mean. Like, look, the aesthetic and fantasy of Guardian, I agree, it's really cool, but man, it's such a boring attack spec. But there's stuff like that that just, you know, hasn't really seen change yet. So I'm not saying the Blizzard have fixed everything and made it perfect, but there was this period of time where we were not seeing that much class changes. That was getting, honestly, pretty darn worrying to us in the office when we were doing our videos. It's really nice that now, you know, now actually we're in a better state there. And I actually remember in the easy class wins, remember, like a few episodes ago, I said that if you had some, like, you know, things that you think could be an easy victory for your class, like just a small change would have a big impact, to leave them down in the comments. Well, you know, they're going to be passed along, right? And from what I understand, Blizzard are pretty receptive to that and pretty happy about that. And that's a type of feedback that the dev team actually really appreciates. So you should know that actually, yeah, you're being listened to there. And yeah, I mean, the state communication stuff's actually pretty sweet. So, you know, good on you, Blizz. There's still more work to do, but it's nice to see all this stuff happening. And then finally, we're going to end it with something you can do in-game, and that is the Blizz have announced 5 weeks of back-to-back time walking, covering all time walking categories, I believe, and a 50% rep boost to, you know, to your reputation for those weeks. That's great. Man, okay, time walking has suffered so much from its schedule because, I mean, you know, you'd want to time walk, but hey, you can't because it's Pet Battle Week, or, you know, you want to do Wrath, but you can't because it's Warlords, and that's a problem that's just got worse and worse and worse over time because, of course, they've added so many time walking weeks, but they've still had, like, a similar cadence. So I think this is a really, really good thing for Blizz to do, and to be honest with you, there's a little bit of me that just thinks, would it make more sense to just have time walking, like, you know, be like this all the time, and the other like events happen on top of it. Now, in fairness, there would be one issue there, and that is that if you currently do, of course, your 4-time walking dungeons, you will get, I believe, a bit of normal quality raid loot. So that would be pretty OP if that was always in the game. But hey, as well, if you want to catch up with your character, yeah, that's an extra bit of Nyalotha gear every week, I suppose. Anyway, a pretty cool change, and it does really line up with that thing Blizzard have been doing recently, right? Where they've been trying to do these events to sort of juice up a bit more excitement in the game. And look, even though it might feel like because of 8.3's initial quality that that's fighting a losing battle, I do actually appreciate them trying. It's like at the end of Mists of Pandaria and that 14-month content drought where Blizzard were still like, yeah, well, you know what, we're going to do some events, we're going to do some stuff so that players have got reasons to play the game. I think that does make a lot of sense for them to do. That said, though, this is a pretty sweet opportunity. I mean, man, you want to get your Netherwing? You know, you want to spend less time farming those eggs? Well, hey, you're going to get a rat boost in your eggs, so that's pretty cool. Same for the likes of Skedis, like if you're doing the Shatari Skyguard, because that's more of a grindy one, or maybe even some of those Warlords of Draenor reps, maybe you finally want that big, like, metal as hell looking elk, then hey, you can get that. So there you go. That's basically a bunch of cool stuff. And this is also, by the way, I think this is also meeting, I know there was some criticism of a past like rep boost that they did where players were like, yeah, but this doesn't cover the reps that I want. So there's now more complete coverage with this going on. Anyway, that is basically what's up there. Of course, thank you very much for watching today's episode of the WoW News. I think nothing groundbreaking this week, but lots of just nice little stories that you kind of feel good to talk about, which is yeah, just really nice. So there's that. Now, if you want to support our team on Patreon and also get cool things like, well, this is the priest pin. It's the druid pin actually this time, so don't know why that's beside me. But yeah, you can get the druid pin, art pack, a whole bunch of sweet stuff. Of course, our special going into the afterlives, which is very fun. We can't wait to bring you guys the Irish one, the Norse one, the sort of Greco-Roman one in future months. So there's all that stuff. It really supports the team, and it's been a massive morale boost for them. So cheers. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Let me know what your thoughts are about WoW in general down below right now. And with that, I'll see you next time.
Mm-hmm.